All right. Well, welcome and thank you so much for being here on a Tuesday evening. And thank you to Chuck and Teachers Discovery for hosting this event and allowing us to talk a little bit about reading and readers. I'm sure we're going to have people joining us as we get going here. As far as questions, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Or we will have some times where you can actually unmute yourself and just ask a question. If you want to just ask a question live, we'll do a lot. We'll leave some time for questions at the end. But there may be some times within to look at some questions and answer some questions. As Chuck said, I am Brian. I am in Ohio right now, in Canton, Ohio. I saw some Columbus and Dayton and some other Ohio people, and then people from all over the place. So I know we're also dealing with different times. For me, it's 7 o'clock right now, which is when the baseball game starts. That if I would have known was going to happen right now, I might not have agreed now. I'll watch that later. But I am excited to be here to talk a little bit about reading. I'm going to send out a poll here in a couple minutes. I want to make sure some more people trickle in if they're coming, but I'm going to send out a poll here to see where you are as far as what you're doing in your classes, because I know everybody's doing different things right now. And then with regard to readers and novels and reading, and there's a question about that as well. Let me share here and we will get started. There we go. So we're talking about how to use readers. We're going to talk about reading in general, readers in general, and then we will get into some specifics about a hybrid classroom, a remote classroom, a live classroom, how we can use some of these strategies in lots of different situations. If there are more specific questions, or if I maybe forget to mention about how this applies to a hybrid or remote class, and during the question and answer time, we can try to dig into that a little bit more. Or succeeding with novels in hybrid world language class. There's my email address. I will display that a few times throughout the evening and at the end. And if you have more questions that we don't have time for, or something comes up later, I would be glad to help and answer questions later on. Feel free to send me an email and I will get back to you. Just to get started here, kind of a description. Reading is an essential source of input in our world language classes. However, engaging students in the reading process, especially when reading novels, can be a challenge for teachers. As many of us probably know, as we've attempted to use readers in class, how do we provide novels that our students want to read? How do we expand a novel into cultural discussion in the target language? And how do we create a classroom culture in which reading is accepted and enjoyed? That's what we're going to try to dig into today. And we're going to look at these steps, or these components, the importance of a healthy classroom culture. In almost every presentation or webinar or workshop that I do, I spend a little bit of time talking about classroom culture because I think it is so important. In fact, I do some workshops just on classroom culture, because everything works better if we can establish a healthy classroom culture. And if we can't establish a healthy classroom culture, then no strategy or technique or material is going to work, because we're trying to do it in a classroom culture that's unhealthy. We'll look at how to select and create compelling materials. Now, because we're talking about novels, we're not going to look so much at creating materials, but that is something that is a part of reading in general. But today we'll focus a lot on selecting materials that have already been created, how to make those texts comprehensible, and then how to vary our delivery, which again, with a lot of us doing hybrid or remote classes, that's very important. How do we deliver them at all? And then how do we vary that delivery? And then we'll get into some extra strategies for engagement and assessment. Now, because this is only an hour, assessment could be an hour or 2 or 3 hours by itself. So we won't dig into that very deeply, but we will talk about engagement and assessment a little bit if we have time at the end. How do we know that reading is effective? How do we know that reading is something we want to make a big part of our classes? When you get this presentation, you can click on this link. We will share these slides with you. You can click on this link and see some of the research that Dr. Krashen has done. We know that others have done research, but also from our experience in our classes, we know that when our students read, when they truly read, they grow, their skills grow. So from our experience, we know that reading is effective. 2 things that I think are very, very important. We don't adequately promote reading until we truly believe in the power of reading. So once we start to realize how important, how beneficial, how powerful reading is, then we'll start to really promote it and really utilize it better in our classes. So we have to really believe in it. We have to believe in the power of reading to promote it and use it well in classes. Also, if reading does not make our students better, we may need to examine our definition of better, meaning that if the only way we assess our students is the grammar that they know, or the vocabulary that they know, or the little chunks of language that has been extracted and not in a setting where they're reading, then we need to look at the way we're assessing students, because the way they grow when they read is the type of growth we're looking for in our students, or the type of growth that we should be looking for in our students if reading is an important part of our classes. So a couple things there to kind of examine yourself, examine your classes, and see how reading fits into all that you do. Reading works in a healthy classroom culture. And again, this can be an entire workshop, but let me quickly go over some components of a healthy classroom culture. Students step into a new world when they enter. Now, that may be virtually enter right now. And maybe when they enter a Google Meet or a Zoom, or when they watch a video. But when it's class time, when it's language class time, Spanish or French or German, they're in a new world. They're speaking a new language. They're talking about different cultures, and they feel like something is different. They haven't lost their identity, but they are in a new world, and we need to try to maintain that. Students are not intimidated or afraid to make mistakes. Students are accepted, valued, supported, and empowered, including the reading activities that we do. Students expect to hear the target language at least 90% of the time. Obviously, when they're reading the target language. That's easy. But with the activities that accompany reading, we need to be using the target language. Not only are we using the target language, but students expect to hear it. If we speak in English for an extended period of time, it should sound weird to our students. That is part of a world language classroom culture that's not really part of any other classroom. That I believe is essential to having that strong classroom culture where reading works well. Students are engaged for the entire class time, live or virtually. Students are connected to global communities where the target language is spoken. We do that different ways in classroom, but also when we read novels and also other texts and articles and things like that, we are connecting students to communities where that language is spoken. And then students understand that everything has a purpose. They know everything that they read, just like everything that they listen to or every activity they do is increasing and improving their skills, and that is what they'll be assessed on and will make them better, and they will do well in class. Again, when you look at this presentation, if you click on this link, there is a reflection sheet that I use with my students that we do like at the end of the first 9 weeks, where they go through and they check the different things and how much they pay attention, how much they answer questions in class, and so on, to reiterate to them or re-emphasize to them the importance of everything we do in class. So we established that world language culture, or that healthy classroom culture. And then we need to value, practice, and promote reading in our classes. Let me show you this very quickly. When I do my lesson plans every week, this is blank, but this is the format that I use. It's very simple, date, I put activities in, but I always have this off to the right: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And I put X's in here, and listening is pretty much every day we're going to do significant reading or listening. But I want to see 2 or 3 in the course of any week. I want to be sure that we're doing 2 or 3 different reading times, significant reading times, 1 or 2 writing, 1 or 2 speaking. But just to remind myself, make sure that we are reading, make sure it is a significant part of every week. Okay, let's take a look at this poll. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. We have lots of people here, and I'm going to do a poll. I'm going to publish this poll, share this poll. There are 2 questions that I would like for you to answer, please. Which of the following best describes your current situation? And how often do you use readers or student novels in your classroom? So take a minute, if you don't mind, to answer those 2 questions. And again, welcome to everybody who is here. Again, if you're just joining us as we go through this webinar, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can wait and there'll be a time where you can unmute yourself and ask a live question, and I would be happy to answer it. I'm so excited to be doing this tonight. I'm so glad you're here, and I do really appreciate that. I know this is a school night and you have a lot going on, and I appreciate that you're here to learn and grow and use reading and readers better in your classroom. I'm going to give this 30 seconds or so more for people to answer. We still have people coming in. If you're just joining us, we're answering some questions on this poll here. Most of us have voted about how often you use readers and your current teaching situation. As we're answering this, I'll tell you my answer. I am currently teaching live face-to-face classes, as 4 of you are doing with me. So I'm in the minority there. But since August, since the beginning of school, we have been live teaching. Our students had the option to do remote, which is done with a virtual program that I'm not doing. I'm teaching live students. Almost all of our students decided to come live. It's normal school, except that we all wear masks. We try to spread out our desk as much as we can. We have to clean the desk between classes. Some things that are very inconvenient, but we are doing the best to overcome. Our students are doing an incredible job of dealing with it. And teaching through a mask is not fun when you're teaching Spanish, as some of you probably know, or as you can imagine. It just is exhausting. because we speak all day, because we're providing input to our students, and doing that through a mask all day is not fun. But again, we're doing the best we can with that. And then I do use readers in my classroom. So I'm going to end this poll, and I'm going to share the results very quickly here. So I think now you can see the results. So as we can see, 31% of us are teaching only remote. 58% are doing a hybrid, where they're doing some face-to-face and some remote, probably a couple of days a week of one, and then remote some other days. Some are doing, this is tough. I know our French teacher is doing this. She's teaching our live classes, and then she's also taking care of those students who elected to do French remotely, and that is exhausting. So hats off to you who are doing that. And then how often do you use readers? Occasionally. Some people use them often. Some stopped when the pandemic started, which is understandable, and some are just getting into this idea of using readers. If you hear my dog bark throughout the evening, I apologize. He barks at everything. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I appreciate you answering those questions. I'm going to go back to my screen here, knowing that now, and I'm going to open up my poll. Okay. All right, so keys to success with novels, which are keys to success with any reading. We must use compelling text. We should do the best we can to use compelling text, comprehensible text, and vary the delivery. Vary the way in which we deliver or do the reading activities. We're going to go through each one of those here in depth. Compelling text. We should, as best we can, use or provide for our students texts that are compelling and interesting. What I put here is we don't have time for boring text. And boring is kind of simplistic. It's just the word I'm going to use. I put this here. We used to have this reading in one of my classes that was in this textbook that came from a college, and it was about trout farms in Peru or Bolivia, and it was not very interesting. And, you have some students who love reading. They love the language. They would read anything you put in front of them. There's no such thing as a boring text for them. Those students are awesome. Give them everything they can to read, but that's not a lot of our students. A lot of our students would prefer to read something that is interesting to them. I'll use an example. My son, Aaron, who, when he's in 2nd grade now, as he was going through kindergarten, he didn't really like reading. He was learning to read, didn't really read much. And then all of a sudden, he was reading all the time, at night, during the day. And what made the difference was Pokemon. He found these Pokemon books. He loved Pokemon. And all of a sudden, he had a theme that was compelling to him, and he was reading all the time. Now, what are the dangers of texts that are not compelling? Students don't make an effort to comprehend and do not grow. So if it's not interesting, if it's not compelling, then they're not going to try to understand, and that whole time is wasted. They don't grow. It's wasted. They disengage even further from reading at all. If I'm reading something that I don't like, it's not compelling, it's not interesting, I'm not understanding it, then I'm just going to not like reading anything. And reading is important. We want our students to be enthusiastic about reading. And then students don't take our classes. For me, this goes into a lot of what I do because I teach Spanish 3 and 4 and 5, which are elective classes that nobody ever has to take. I need students to want to take the class. And to want to take the class, they have to not just enjoy it, they have to see value in it. And reading is a big part of what they do, what we do in class, and they have to value reading for them to continue, for them to take Spanish 4 and to take AP Spanish 5. So if we're not using compelling texts, those are some of the dangers. A compelling text contains humor sometimes. That doesn't have to be, but it can contain humor. Now, the funny thing about humor is sometimes novels struggle being funny because I write a lot of things for my classes. And what's really funny for my classes is what's personal to that class. It's the short stories that we write or the class creates or that is a result of something we've done in class. Because what's funny to my students may not be funny to your students. And what's funny to one class may not be funny to another class. So sometimes in novels, it's hard to find that humor because, and humor gets outdated quickly. Relevance, it's current, it's up to date, it's relevant. Unexpected, incredible details, and then debate. Sometimes things that students can debate, one thing or another, is relevant to them. As an example, I have this book that I wrote called Los Sobrevivientes about the rugby team from Uruguay that crashed in the Andes Mountains, and they had to decide whether they were going to eat the bodies of those who had passed away. Certainly not a humorous theme for a book. By the way, probably not a story if you're teaching middle school or elementary, but definitely debatable. We can spend a lot of time debating what would you do in that situation. And that debate creates a hook, and that hook is compelling, and compelling texts make them want to continue reading and comprehend. Now, how do we know if a text is compelling? Two things. We have to spend time previewing the text. When it comes to novels, you probably maybe haven't read every novel that you have on your shelf if you have a class library. But it's a good idea as time goes to try to read all the novels and understand what they are, so then you can try to fit them with students. If you're doing a class together novel, then you certainly want to read it before they read it because you want to know the text, because then you'll have an idea if it's compelling and if it's comprehensible. And then number two, we need to know our students. We need to get to know our students, their interests, their likes, their dislikes, their activities, things like that. So when we know our students and we know the text, then we can start to find matches best we can. Now, here's a very, very good question that comes up when we talk about compelling text, because I'm saying, hey, you should pick compelling text for your students to read. And you might say, well, what if I don't have a choice about what my students read? Which is a very, very good question. Maybe you have a set of books and it's the only set of novels that you have, or your administration has decided this is the book you're going to read, or your department head or the other teachers who teach the same language at the same level, and you don't have a choice of what your students read. What can you do? Number one, fight the good fight with leadership, which means continue to have those conversations with administrators and department chairs and other teachers and say, hey, you know what? This story isn't compelling. Can we look at other options? There are lots and lots of options now, especially in Spanish, a lot in French, other languages as well. There are starting to be more and more options for readers. So continue to look for what is best going to fit your students. 2, adapt, edit, skip, and summarize sections. If you're reading a story and it's too long, or parts of it are just not interesting or not compelling, this was a revelation to me that helped me. You don't have to read every word or every page of the novel. You can, now if you have access, you can adapt and edit, or you can just summarize and skip chapters 7, 8, and 9 and move on to chapter 10. Sometimes it's the length of novels that causes trouble. And so there are some things that you can do, like skipping and summarizing and moving along, that help. Be sure to make the text comprehensible. If it's not super compelling or your students don't seem to like it, make sure they can understand it, because if they don't like it and they don't understand it, you don't stand a chance. So make sure your texts are comprehensible if they're not as compelling as you want them to be. Try to connect boring text to interesting activities. So if you have a part of a chapter, or you have a chapter or a couple chapters which maybe aren't that compelling, do things along with them that are interesting. Do things that are fun and engaging with them. And then this, add very interesting readings to rekindle the desire to read. So if I have to read this reader or this novel and it's not compelling to my students, then I'm also going to read something else that I know is humorous or relevant or very interesting or compelling to my students, so that they don't lose that enthusiasm for reading in general. Show them, hey, reading can be fun and interesting, even if maybe you don't like this text that we're doing. Some activities to make novels more compelling, this idea of trying to connect boring text to interesting activities. You can talk about what would you do in a situation. You can change the story. Maybe if there's a chapter where not much happens, you either as a class or individually change some details to make it more interesting. Actors you can use. Now that's a little tougher in remote classes, but you can use actors. You can use images and things to make it more interesting, comprehensible, and compelling. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. And then with regard to compelling text, when we look at our classes in general, we want to find a balance between authentic and non-authentic or teacher-created text. Now, as we talk about novels, that's pretty much most of the time going to be non-authentic text, and that's fine. I think that's okay. There's a place for that in almost any level. So what that means is if we're looking for that balance in what we read, and we're spending a lot of time reading a non-authentic reader, we also want to supplement it throughout the week, throughout the month, or the year with some authentic text as well, so we can find that balance. I have here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now. You can look at these slides later. I have kind of my ideas of what I like to see happen in levels 1 through 5. And as you can see, as you look at this, the amount of authentic text that we read and what we do and how we adapt those increases as we go level to level. So as you're level 1, you're doing a lot of teacher created materials, maybe novels is the bulk of what you're doing. And as we go up, now maybe we're reading even authentic novels, or we're reading articles and things like that. So you can see how how we want to find that balance between authentic text and teacher created text. Okay, so compelling text as best we can is key number 1. Key number 2 is we want our novels to be comprehensible. They have to be. Our students have to understand that. Now, if I'm considering using a novel for class, and I open it and I look at the words and I look at what's the text in there, it may not be comprehensible right away. So there might be some things we need to do to make it comprehensible for our students. A few things we can do. Number 1 is adapt text to make them more comprehensible. I kind of mentioned this a minute ago. We can cut out unnecessary parts. Maybe we're going to skip or summarize some parts. We can define and summarize some parts. Let me show you. This is not a novel. This was an article. And this would depend on what kind of access you have. If you have access, you can adapt and edit a text. But, just writing in some definitions, underlining, numbering paragraphs so students can see, you can talk about different paragraphs and point things out. But if you can kind of just add some things to the text, that goes a long way in making it comprehensible. Oops. Defining, summarizing parts, previewing text. We're going to read it, and I'm going to get into this a little more here in a second, but we're going to read something. And this example here is not a novel either. This was a song that we were actually listening to and reading. But before we read it, we had this short introduction. A young man is in love with a girl, but it's hard for him to communicate his love for her. The boy knows that Tommy Torres is very good with words and poetry, and he writes him a letter and asks Tommy to help him express his love to the girl. So a summary that I know we're going to understand before we read the text that may be a little more difficult to understand. Here's another example. This is one of my novels that I have, El Carterista de Pamplona, which is about a pickpocket in Pamplona during the San Fermin festival. And this is from chapter 14 of the book. And I think here's a digital version of, here's chapter 14. If it, yeah, here's chapter 14. As you can see, not super long, but that's the entire chapter. Before we read that chapter, and I have this in English. I would do this in Spanish, but this is one that I put in English to help with presentations. But we would read a summary of what's going to happen in the chapter. So Arturo and Clara were running hand in hand, leading the procession of frightened tourists and angry bulls. Because all roads were blocked, their only option was to enter the Plaza de Navarra. The first floor of the building was filled with smoke and chaos. Some people were yelling fire, while others yelled bulls. Arturo grabbed the rocket and was headed for the exit when Clara let go of his hand. He was searching for her in the dark with Camilo yelling in his earpiece, Arturo, get out of there and leave her. Arturo was reaching for her when, boom. Okay, and again, we would do that in the target language. It's a shorter version of what the chapter is going to be, and it does two things. One, it helps students understand the main idea, and two, it generates a little bit of excitement. Because as you can see, there's a lot of action happening here. This is not the entire chapter, but it gets students interested in what's going to happen in this chapter of the book. Now, that idea is also something that we call embedded readings. And whenever we talk about embedded readings and workshops, it's funny because there are some people that have used embedded readings all the time and they have been using them for years and know exactly what it is. There are other people who have never heard of it, and we're all kind of in the middle here with what embedded readings are. So let me pretty quickly here talk about what an embedded reading is. The idea of an embedded reading is basically students are going to read 2 to 3 versions of the same text. Each version contains more text or more complex language. So I have a chapter. This one I've translated to English. This is another one of my novels called La Novia Perfecta, or The Perfect Girlfriend. This is the story is in Spanish, but this is in English for us to use at a workshop. This is chapter 1. Okay, so this is my chapter 1 that I want our students to read together of this novel. Before we actually see this entire chapter 1 text, we're going to see shortened, modified versions of it. Here's version 1, and this has the entire text, but what I've put in bold is what students are going to see first. Miguel Lopez Colon is 27 years old, born in Puebla, Mexico. He can speak English and Spanish. He's not happy. He feels very lonely, needs a girlfriend, was bored and wanted to go out with a friend. He got sad. No one wanted to hang out with him. He needed a girlfriend. Okay, that is the basics of what's going to happen in this chapter. And I'm going to make sure that every student understands every word of that shortened version. I can project it on the screen. I can put it on a document. I can put it in a video if we're doing remote learning, or I can put it on a slide and display it in a Zoom classroom. But I'm going to make sure every student understands just that. Then version 2. And in version 2, we're going to add details. And so I put in red here what I would add to it. A few more details, not everything. A few more details that just add a little bit of dialogue, not all the dialogue, things here and there. That's version 2. Now we're going to make sure students understand that. And you could do 3, 4, 5 versions if you want. Students might lose interest if you do it too much, but we add a little bit to each part. And then now when it's time to read this entire chapter, they understand the main idea of what's going to happen. They understand generally what's going to happen, and now we're just adding details. And it's less intimidating, and it's easier for students to comprehend everything that's going on. So that is a very quick and basic demonstration and explanation of what an embedded reading is. So you can do that with a chapter. You can do that with multiple chapters. I don't know that you could do that with an entire novel, but as you go through the sections of your novel, you can create embedded readings. And when you do embedded readings, you can do embedded readings from the bottom up or from the top down, meaning you can create version 1 first, add to it, and then you get your final version. But when we're thinking about novels, it's more likely going to be from the top down. We're going to take that chapter and we're basically going to chop. We're going to cut things out of it, cut things that are not necessary. Let me go back to this a second. So I'm looking at chapter 1 or whatever chapter, and I'm looking, what is the absolute basic necessary text? And everything that's not basic, I'm chopping out, and I'm just giving them the basics. So again, that's embedded reading. If you have questions about that, embedded reading, remember that, embedded reading, and we can talk about that later. Another way to make sure texts are comprehensible is to use visuals. Visuals do two things. They slow us down, and they help students understand. They help students comprehend. Now, in class, some of us are doing hybrid classes. Some of us are teaching live. We can take actors. You know, we're reading part of a chapter, and if there's dialogue or there's action happening, I can have students stand up and they can act it out in class. And a lot of times when we do that, we're reading the text for a second or third time. So not only are we seeing and helping us understand the text, but we're also getting more repetition of the text. And a lot of times that's fun, and it's really engaging, and it kind of brings the text to life. Can you do that in a remote setting? You could. If you're doing something live on Zoom or Google Meet, and you can have different people read parts and even act out in front of a camera, that's awesome. That would be a great way to have actors be part of a story. And that's actually something I might try sometime, because I've never tried, and I think that would be really fun. You could use, you can make a video with, you know, images or puppets or whatever, and try to use actors and have fun. Or we can use images. Let me show you a couple of things. And these are things that I've done with videos. This, I believe, I'm going to go here and show you a video. And we're going to talk about screencasts here in a minute. But, oops. Let me show you here a video. And this is something that I recorded. This would be chapters 9 through 11 of this novel.
Los sobrevivientes, capítulos 9, 10 y 11. Capítulo 9. El hambre, el frío, el silencio, el agotamiento, la falta de esperanza, la cercanía de los cuerpos de los amigos. Las condiciones estaban por vencerles a los sobrevivientes al amanecer del tercer día. Pero un milagro los animó. Roberto se despertó cuando oyó un ruido.
Okay, so as you can see in this one, the text is not displayed. They're just listening. But images are helping them to understand what they hear. And so those images in a video, so this would be something you can do in a remote or hybrid situation, the images are helping them understand. Let me show you another similar video, but with the text. You can also do that with
Los
the text.
sobrevivientes, capítulos para a la velocidad necesaria. Roberto y Nando le pidieron que regresara a picos de montañas, cumbres y nada más.
So then we have the text, we have some images, and then we have some description over it. And I think
Antonio dejó su ropa y su comida con Roberto y Nando. Each other, that they weren't going to send his food.
All right, let me show you one other thing too. I actually threw a little English in here to explain some things.
It can mean a couple things. It can mean to leave behind. So Antonio left his clothing and his food con Roberto y Nando. It can also mean to stop doing something. So they promised each other that they weren't going to stop their trip. They weren't going to give up or stop on their trip until they found help.
So in that video with the text, the images and a little explanation there can help comprehension. So images within a video or live can help us make the text comprehensible. And again, it's slowing us down. It'll slow us down with the images, and then it'll help students understand. Drawing is a good way to do that. Here's an example I have from a class. Let's see if I can open this up. Yeah. Oops. Images like this, this would be more live, but you can obviously do drawing and images and hold it up to your camera, or sometimes you have different ways that you can draw. But as you tell the story, this was a story that we told in class. As we went through the story, I was drawing the different parts. This is the story La Continuidad de los Parques, Cortázar. It's one of those stories like within a story, and it was kind of complex, but the drawing helps students understand what was happening throughout the story. So if we draw as we tell the story, it slows us down and it helps students understand. Students can draw as well A lot of times when we do reading or we read a chapter of a book or we'll read a story or whatever, I'll just give them something like this and I will tell them either they have to pick 8 different parts of the story and draw it, or I will indicate this is part 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they have to draw what's there. So student drawing can help with comprehension as well. All right, and then the third, and this is one of the most important things we do, sometimes we have to pre-teach the language. Sometimes there's language in a chapter of a book. And this is one of the things that maybe discourages us from using novels, is that my students aren't going to understand that, which is a legitimate concern. And so we have to teach the vocabulary and the structures and the grammar necessary for them to understand the language. When we look at a text, there are 4 types of unknown vocabulary. So if I'm looking at a book that my students are going to read, and again, we want to look at the text before the students do. And I'm going to look for words they don't know. And if I know my students and I know the text, then I know what they don't know. And that's important. And when I find words and phrases they don't know, I have to decide, is it something that's not important? Is it a word that's not important? Is it something that students can understand with context? Is it needed to comprehend the chapter or the book or the story? Or is it high frequency and valuable for future use? Is it something that I know that they need not only to understand, but also something that they can take from this reading and use in lots of situations in the future? If it's number 1, not important, leave it. And train students not to worry. Train students not to stress over every single word. Sometimes you don't understand a word and it's okay. If your students are headed for AP, like a lot of our students are at my school, one of the things they have to be able to do is look at a text where they don't understand every word and understand the main ideas. So it's important to get them to understand that sometimes a word is not important. If you understand 98% of what's going on there, you understand the story, and that's okay. If it's not important and you think it's going to cause trouble, you can remove it, or you could define it. If it's understood with context, and these two are very similar. If it's understood with context, again, leave it. Check to make sure they understand it, because they don't always understand the way you think they will. And then practice that idea of using context clues. This is, again, not a novel, but a story and just an example of sometimes how we do this. Sometimes I will actually take a reading and I will put something like this in there. Oops. I will say, using the context, write an English definition for each word found in the story. And I will make them deliberately go through and see if they could define words using context. So teach them how to do that and teach them that's okay to do. Now, number 3, if it's necessary for comprehension for the story, then we need to make sure we define it. We can do that within the text. If you can write on the text, define it that way. We can project it. Like if students are reading in class, sometimes I'll put on the screen a list of 7 or 8 words they may not know, and they're just there as they're reading. We can do it before reading, give them a list in notes. If you're doing a virtual hybrid class, you give them that digital document or whatever, or a slide or whatever, and say, these are the words you might not know. Keep this as a reference as you read. You need to know these words to comprehend. If it's one of these types of words and they just understand it for the text and then they don't remember it down the road, that's okay. We just need them to comprehend. Now, if it's the 4th type of vocabulary, then it's different. Now we want them to use it. So we need to make sure we define it. Then we need to internalize it and personalize it and use it. So we're going to ask questions about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to repeat it over and over again, practice it, Quizlet, Text-Evate, quizzes, assess it, reuse it. We're going to use that word or phrase over and over again. So not only will they understand it in the story, but now they'll take it and they'll use it. And those are the best kind of phrases. So again, something not important, understood with context, needed for comprehension, or valuable for future use. As an example, I'm going to open up Flangu here, which has readers, digital readers in Spanish. And so let's say I want to open up one of these stories. And I know that we're reading chapter 1 as a class. So I'm going to go through here, and I'm sorry, this is in Spanish if you're not a Spanish teacher. And I'm going to read the text as the teacher first, and I'm going to decide what words don't my students know, and where do those words fit. And then do I just need to define them? Do I need to give them a list? But let's say I'm looking at this text. And so it says, it started to rain hard, heavy. Cristobal felt his clothing wet. Maybe they don't know the word wet. So I'm going to define wet. Wet, I don't think that's that important for them to know right now and take from this text. So I'm just going to define it. Mojada means wet. Now you can understand that and keep going. The cold, it was so cold it got down to his bones. Ooh, bones is a good word. I want my students to know bones. So I'm going to define the word bones, but then I'm going to do some other things with it. Practice, assess, personalized questions, and so on. I'm going through, I'm looking again at things they don't know. And, here's one. Intentó liberarse. He tried to free himself. That's a really good word. Trying, because talking about trying to do something is important in language. And so it's high frequency. So I'm going to do a lot with that to help my students internalize it before we go on. Okay. So again, you look at the text and decide which of those is it and what am I going to do with it. I have another example of that here. Again, when you have these slides, this was something that I did with a reading from class. And I had to decide, these are the words my students didn't know. I had to decide what was going to be the most high frequency, what was going to be the most valuable to my students, and what could we practice a lot before we read. So again, this is important. To make that all work, we have to preview the text and we have to know our students well. All right, the last key, and then we'll get to some questions. We have to vary the way we deliver it. Now, some of us are kind of required to do that now because we're in hybrid classes or remote classes, and so we're finding new ways to do reading. Regardless of your situation, you can't do reading the same way every time. You have to use individual reading, class reading, reading out loud, reading with a video, reading lots of different things. The types of things that we read have to be different. When we look at novels, a lot of times the question I get is, how should I do a novel? Should I do it as a full class? Should I do the novel should I do the novel in a couple weeks and be done with it? Should I spread it out over a year? How should I do that novel? And the answer is yes. The answer is you can do it any of those ways, and you should do it lots of different ways. We have to vary the way we do it. So one option is the novel is class. And this is good a lot of times in lower levels. So let me open up a level 1 reader here. So maybe a lot of what I'm doing is going to be on this novel. So let's open up like this one. This is a level 1 novel. And so when I think about what am I going to focus on teaching in class, my focus is going to be whatever words my students need to be able to understand this story. So we're going to talk a lot about tengo, I have, and I want, and he lives and wants, and so on. And so that's going to be what drives my class, is teaching all the structures my students need to be able to understand this book. And that's why picking a good book is important, because if that book has a lot of high frequency structures, then it's a good book because you're teaching those high frequency structures and students can understand a story, and then they can take that and do important things and communicate with the language. So that's the novel being the bulk of your class. Another option is the novel is part of class. So maybe we do part of it every week, or, we're doing other things. We do part of it every Friday or whatever. And then that's going to take longer, but it's going to be different, and we can do other things. We can prepare students for the entire novel, meaning I can look at an entire novel, see what things students wouldn't know, what I need to define, and so on, and do a lot of preparation. And they can read the entire novel. A lot of times that's like at the end of the year. I'm going to do a novel at the end of the year, and I think my students would understand most of it. And so maybe there's only a few things throughout the entire novel they wouldn't know. So I'll prepare them for that. Or I can prepare students as we go. Chapter 1, this is what we need to know. Chapter 2, this is what we need to know. Chapter 3, 4, and 5, this is what we need to know. You can do it lots of ways, and you should do it lots of different ways. This, again, you can click on. Here's an article that I wrote about different ways to include variation when we read. Very important. One way to do variation is to use screencast, use video. Now, again, a lot of us have to do this now. We have to do screencasts and videos of reading because we can't give our students text. But regardless of our situation, one way that we can vary reading is that students are actually watching a video while they read. I showed you these examples here. This one had just images and audio. This one had text and audio. Let me show you very quickly a couple others here. Let me open this one for you. This was at the end of.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
This is when we were doing remote classes last year.
Amy, despiértate y presta atención. El español es muy importante. Amy se ríe. Cuando Amy saca aquí y Richie está aquí. Nerd. Pero hoy el nerd la.
So you can see, again, using the text, using images. If you can record yourself where you see yourself in the video, that's good because you can use gestures and you can do things to kind of repeat and make it more comprehensible. So that's a way to vary the way we do reading. There are more examples here. There are also, again, a lot of us are doing screencasts now, but I use a program called Screencast-O-Matic. There are some links here if you want information on how to use that to make screencasts for reading. I talked a little bit about this already. Again, it's one of the variations we can do. Sometimes we can read a text together, read every word together, read individually, whatever. Also, sometimes what we can do for reading is I can put a summary of chapters 7, 8, and 9 on the screen or on a paper, and we'll read the summary. That allows us to go a little faster, and it's just kind of a different way that we read. Again, there's an example there of how that worked. One of the other big keys for varied delivery, or one of the other strategies for reading, is free voluntary reading or silent sustained reading or individual reading. And you can do this. Some people do this as the only way the students read in class. Some people make this, they do some in-class classroom sets of novels, and they do voluntary reading. However you want to do it, it's a very effective way for reading. If you have a class library, students can pick books and read them, and you can do different activities with that. Here's a document that I used last year. I'll make a new one for 2020 this year. And I tried to, when students did free voluntary reading, the idea is we want them reading, just reading, and not stressed out about a lot of other things. So the only thing I required students to do was at the end, when they finished a book, is they had to put in English a few little things about the book. So they did one side of this document where they wrote a summary of what happened in English, some things that they learned from it. And in the other side, they did a review, how many stars they think, they valued the book, or they evaluated the book, some English descriptions, and so a review and so on. The idea with this, and this was a paper document, was when I would hang them up in class, this side would be visible so other students could see and help them decide on the books they wanted to use. And this side would be turned around so they wouldn't spoil the book for others. Flangu, as I was showing you before, offers us a way to do that digitally. There are more books and novels being added to this. Some of my novels will be added to this within the next couple of weeks. This is Spanish. Chuck, I'm sure, can tell us if there are other languages going to be available. But that's digital. And there are actually ways in here students can rate those books as well so they can see. But you can do that digitally as you have access to PDFs and ebooks as well. Free voluntary reading. And then when we do any kind of reading, another thing we vary is how we assess. Are we just saying, hey, read for pleasure? I'm just going to make sure you're reading. Are we asking them to review? Are we doing comprehension assessments? I use Otis, which is a program our school has with quizzes, Google Forms for comprehension questions. We can do writing or speaking assessments where students have to write from a different point of view. They write a new ending. They write what happens next. They interview a character. We can extend reading with those type of activities. I like this cause and effect activity. Different things from a chapter. Like, so this is chapter 16. And you put, events, boom, here. So this is a cause, and students have to write the effect. Down here are effects, and students have to write what caused it from the story. Student questions, games, online resources, Text-Evade, Edpuzzle is great. Sometimes we don't do a lot of translating, but we can do translating as well. When it comes to assessment, Again, a giant topic. Let me just touch on it very quickly. One thing about assessment when it comes to reading, if we really believe that reading is making students grow in their entire proficiency, then when we assess writing and when we assess speaking, we are assessing reading because we believe that reading made them stronger. So if I write well, it's because I read well. So if we make that a part of our assessment and we get students to buy into that idea, reading makes me a better writer, then it's all connected. But we can also do questions, comprehension questions. If you want to click on this link, this has AP type questions. I start to sprinkle those in from level 3. The types of questions that show up on the AP exam, we're going to do with reading and novels in levels 3 and 4 and 5. This is an individual reading comprehension assessment, again, you can look at that link. It's if students are reading individually, there are questions for every chapter. In Flangu, in Voces Digital, there are also activities that go along with every chapter if you're doing digital reading like that. When students are writing and speaking, I like to offer multiple prompt options. They can pick different things to write or speak about. All right, so 10:52, not too bad. We're going to take some time for questions here for a few minutes. A couple things let me tell you before we get into that. Flangu, as I mentioned a couple times here from Teachers Discovery, there is an offer here for you to get $10 off the purchase using this code Bryan with a Y, the correct spelling with a Y, Bryan20 at checkout. Chuck may have some more details about that for us. And then I have an email here, and if you weren't here at the beginning, if you have questions that we don't get to tonight, I would be glad to help you. Here's an email. That's a website. That's the website. That's an email. Glad to help you. These are the novels that I have available. These 4 are out right now. These 2 are coming out like within the next week or 2. So watch for those. Available at my website, available at Voces, and some of them, these 3 will be on Flangu pretty soon. So I have lots of novels available. If you're interested in that, I can enjoy. They're all in Spanish. Sorry if you're not a Spanish teacher.
I think a lot of your novels are also going to be available on teachersdiscovery.com.
Cool.
And they're going to be on Amazon. Do you sell them on Amazon?
Oh yeah, there are some on Amazon as well. Yeah.
So you're kind of everywhere.
So yeah, can't miss them. Okay.
Well, Bryan, if you'd like, I had a couple of questions that popped up in chat. I actually have them in front of me. If you want to go that way.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, the first question was a pretty simple one. They wanted to know, how did you record your screen like that?
When you record my screen for the videos? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's in that, and I use a program called Screencast-O-Matic. There are lots of screencast programs, Screencastify. There's different ones that you can use. I like Screencast-O-Matic. I think the quality is good. It allows me to record a video of myself along with what's on my screen. So it basically records everything that's on the screen with my voice and a video.
Simple enough.
I just create a slideshow, start the recording, go through the slideshow, talk over it, and that creates a video.
Awesome. Another question is, do you always read aloud or do you assign the reading as homework?
I do not always read aloud. Actually, I mean, I read aloud. Students read individually, students read in groups. Sometimes it's homework. I don't do a lot of homework because, if students don't do it, then, when it comes to reading, and reading is very important. I like doing reading in class, but you could assign it as homework individually. So lots of different ways.
All right. Another question is, how do you grade these readings?
Okay. And that's varied as well. Sometimes it's just simply, did they read or not? Sometimes there are comprehension questions that go along with them. Sometimes it's the writing. It's the writing reaction to a reading that I'm going to grade. Lots of different ways. It just depends on what you're trying to assess. If you're trying to assess, did they comprehend it? Then it's comprehension questions. And with the remote learning, that's what I found myself doing a lot of at the end of last year, was questions that they could only answer if they read the text. They weren't grammar-based questions. They weren't vocabulary-based questions. They were questions that they had to read the text in order to answer. And they can be simple, but yeah.
And then I think there were some questions that were sent by email. I'm not sure if we got to those or not. I can't remember. Do you remember those? Did you have those in front of you, or?
For me, it was one of them was one of the ones you just said. Did we?
Oh.
Do you read aloud to your students?
Oh, all right.
Yes, and yes, I do read aloud to my students. And there was another part to it, but I forget what the second part of that was.
Oh, they got some new questions that just popped up in chat. Do you have assessments already? Oh, that's for teachers or are they in your readers? I think that's actually a Flangu question. So I'm going to skip that one for now and we'll come back to that. Do you assess comprehension questions in English or Spanish?
Ooh, good question. Usually Spanish, sometimes English. The thing about English is, they can't just pull the text out of the reader. They have to understand it. I just did an English assessment yesterday in class. So I do English every once in a while, usually Spanish because I just don't like using too much English, but both.
And then one of the big questions that people are asking is if they can have a link to your presentation, which
okay. Do you want me to put that in there now?
I couldn't find it anywhere. Yeah, if you have it, will you toss that into the chat for people so that they can grab that?
Give me a second and I will put that in the chat. Yeah, and in that presentation, there are lots of links, some things that we didn't dig into a lot today. Get link. Copy link. Okay, and let me go back here.
When you read in class together, do you use daily structures like one would in other CI activities?
Let me see.
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay.
Is that going to be a link? Yeah. Okay. I just put the link in there. Hopefully, let me know if that doesn't open for you if you don't have access to it, but you should be.
Hold on just a second.
Public.
Because I got shared privately. So one second.
Oh, I went to you.
I got it. And there we go. There it is.
So the question was, do I use daily structures?
Yes.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by daily structure. Like target structures probably is what you mean. And yes, sometimes we do. Sometimes we use target structures where we take a chunk of language, like a sentence or a phrase or sometimes a word, and we rep it over and over again with personalized questions and different activities before we read. Not every reading, but often we do that. Awesome. Right. Evan. Somebody was at the book evaluation form. That book evaluation form is in the slides. So that slide that I just shared has, it's what's called FVR 2019. Sharing the screen here. And that book evaluation form is in there. If for some reason you don't have that or find it, let me know and I'll get it for you. But back to the slide that says free voluntary reading FVR 2019. That form is in there. You're welcome to use it, adapt it, change it. And yeah. And again, I'll just open it so you can see it. Other questions?
Let me see. I don't see anything else. Does anybody have any more questions before we wrap up for the night? And again, you can
yes,
put it in the chat, or you can actually unmute yourself. Oh, there we go. Yeah,
go ahead.
I was typing. I cannot see the link to the PD certificate anymore in the chat.
Oh.
So if you won't mind putting it back. Otherwise, thank you. It was very helpful.
Did you get that,
Brian, or do you?
The PD certificate. The PD certificate. I don't have.
There was like a link earlier.
I
cannot go back.
I have.
I
have that.
I'm not in charge of that.
I have that. That is right here. Here is in the chat right now is the link for the PD certificate.
Thank you.
There you go. It's just a short form. If you'll fill that out for me, and I'll be able to get that out to you. It takes me a few days, so give me like 2 days, 2 or 3 days, but I will get that out as quickly as I possibly can.
Thank you all for the comments. I'm glad it's helpful. I know we went kind of fast through that, but I didn't want us to, go too late being a school night. So again, if you have questions, you have the slides, you can email me. I'd be glad to help out.
Let's see, you're going to contact. I would definitely be the person to contact if your question is regarding Flangu itself. So definitely reach out to me. I'm going to post a link to that right here in the chat.
I will say about Flangu, I just got access, and I haven't used it yet with students, but I've been wanting something like that for a long time. So I'm glad to see it developed, and hopefully we'll add more and more resources to it, because that kind of like digital access to lots of titles is awesome, because it's so hard to build a classroom library and offer enough titles for students. So I'm really excited about that. Hope to see that really grow.
Very cool. All right. Well, I certainly appreciate it. Bryan, I'm so glad you could make it out tonight. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
And
my pleasure.
Everybody else, hopefully you have all of the links, but if you've missed anything, this entire presentation has been recorded. It will be up and available on YouTube. I will be sending an email out to all of the attendees, and it will contain all of these links. So you will have links to the presentation, you'll have links to the presentation files, to everybody's emails, everything that we have tonight. I'll make sure that gets out to you by email within the next day or two. So again, Bryan, thank you so much for joining. Everybody else, I hope you have a fantastic evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Chuck. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Flangoo.com